This is the lecture for Jennifer Whiting's Friends and Future Selves. So two topics. First, just very tiny. You'll notice she talks about Perry in the article. You may remember Perry as the first person we read. He wrote the dialogue, and we get a bit of Perry's own views reported here, kind of in, I think when she talks about the extreme claim. I don't know. She talks about it somewhere. So that's just interesting to think about now that we're learning what Perry thinks about these things. You can go back and think about what he said in the dialogue and try to figure out, was the dialogue trying to convince you of Perry's view, or was the dialogue just presenting various views and it had nothing special to say about Perry's view, or what do you think? Second, you'll notice a big part of the very first part of the article, so around 548, 549, she talks about the extreme claim, or what turns out to be four versions of the extreme claim. So this thing called the extreme claim is like the term R relation, something from Parfit that we did not read because this is a term that he uses in the book, but not in the article. And I mean, she explains the extreme claim pretty well and straightforwardly, but also very concisely. I don't since as she points out there's four versions of it, I'm not going to sort of explain it here. I think she explains it about as clearly as you're going to get, and if you have more questions, we can always talk about it in class. What I'm instead going to highlight is one aspect of the extreme claim, both to help you understand the extreme claim and to understand something that really it's been here the whole time in the class, or especially since we started talking about Parfit, but really the whole time, and just to make it explicit because it's only been implicit so far. And this is a point about rationality. And so, uh, like she's talking about the different versions of the extreme claim, and she says the strong versions claim that it is irrational to have a certain sort of concern for our future selves. The weak versions claim only that such concern is not rationally required. And so this talk about rationality and what we are rationally required to do and what it would not be irrational to do, and specifically this talk about whether it would be irrational to have a certain sort of concern or it's not rationally required to have a certain sort of concern. So we've been talking about this the whole time, and we may even have talked about it in terms of rationality. But if you think about, for instance, Williams, um, what was his concern there? Or what was his article about? So his article was about, how would you feel if you learned that these things were going to happen to you, and what sort of procedures would you fear or whatever. And the way Williams went about it was sort of asking, like, what would it be natural to feel, or what would it be natural to think? But like the thought is that we're interested in what would it be sort of rational to feel, or what would it be rational to think. And Williams thinks we can get at this by thinking about like what we would naturally feel, because like presumably we're not being irrational when we have these sorts of feelings. Although we sometimes are, because remember for Williams, like the two ways of describing it give us two different results. But broadly speaking, like if I tell you you're going to be tortured tomorrow and nothing else is going to happen, like we're not going to do anything to your psychology, you might say, "Oh, great, sounds good," because you just you're a very strange person. You don't understand that things that happen that like I don't know, for some irrational reason, you don't care about what's going to happen tomorrow. And in fact, we got a version of this with future Tuesday indifference, if you recall, which Parfit talked about in his comment reply to Wolf, I think. The person who is future Tuesday indifferent does not care about anything that happens on Tuesdays in the future. So if I tell them they're going to be tortured on Tuesday in the future, they don't care. And this is irrational. It would be irrational not to care about bad things coming up in your future or good things coming out. That's just, well, presumably it's irrational. I mean, you'll see in the extreme claim that you might doubt this, but like probably it's irrational. And similarly, it's irrational to have all sorts of attitudes or beliefs or things like that. And so, uh, of course, anybody can think anything they want about personal identity or any topic in philosophy. Uh, but what we're interested in is what we rationally ought to think. So, assuming that we're behaving rationally, doing what rationality requires of us, how should we feel about, for instance, our future selves, which is one of the it's like the central topic of this article. And in a way, it's one of the central topics of this whole class. Like rationally, how should you feel about your future self? William says, well, rationally, you ought to be concerned with what's going to happen to your body as opposed to what's going to happen to your psychology in some other body. And, similarly for the different sorts of theories. So that's just to make explicit something that's been implicit the whole time, since it plays a big role in the extreme claim and in this article and really in the whole class.